As a kid, I dreamt of the perfect science fiction computer game. In it, I was a space pirate, shooting and shagging my way across the universe. In fact, as a gawky teenager, it seemed far more probable to me that I was going to lose my virginity to an alien from outer space rather than to a girl from Liverpool.
Right, Captain Scarlet.
SF-UK is my trip through the alternate universe of British science fiction. We Brits invented science fiction. We came up with all the big ideas, and we did them better, darker, and weirder. The British have been creating science fiction for over 100 years, from a time when the most interactive, immersive gaming experience was shove halfpenny. An Edwardian Englishman from Bromley called H.G. Wells started it all, and even if his books aren't bestsellers now, the films they inspired have become classics.
This is how it began.
This is a solemn moment in the history of mankind. We're off!
What's happening?
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Alien invasion, time travel, genetic engineering, invisibility, angels, futuristic war, the rise of utopia, fascist dictatorship of the future, the atom bomb. He got there first. He did all that stuff.
H.G. Wells is too near God for me to say anything about. He must be one of the greatest geniuses we've ever produced in this country.
The most insane, mind-bending ideas of British science fiction come out of these terribly English, terribly boring places. If you put a genius in the repressed, flat-pack world of the suburbs, it warps their imagination. The godfather of British science fiction, H.G. Wells, grew up in the suburbs in Bromley, just outside Kent. And in his most famous book, War of the Worlds, he took great pleasure in laying waste to them.
Wells was a great exemplar of the delight in destruction. He was also a war gamer. He loved shoving little soldiers around and blowing things up and all that. And I know that when he wrote War of the Worlds, he went on a cycling holiday up and down the Thames to all the sites of the places he was going to destroy. And he wrote letters back to his friends saying, I've just devastated Dorking, and tomorrow I will be reducing Kingston upon Thames to rubble. Presumably, if any barmaid was rude to him in a pub, he was really going to destroy that place.
Wells used his books to get back at all those people who had sneered at him, and the instruments of his revenge were giant aliens from Mars. But Wells wasn't just interested in exploring outer space. He was also well into free love. So who knows what was going on behind those curtains. Wells had an unorthodox sex life. He married his cousin, Isabel, who he abandoned within a year to shack up with Amy Catherine. He was into sexual expression, an outrageous hobby which led him to take refuge in Surrey. After Wells published The Time Machine, he moved to this area of Woking with his second wife. Now, though this area looks very suburban, it was in fact very working class at the time. The more well-appointed part of town is over the railway there. So Wells literally lived the wrong side of the tracks. And this has been our pilgrimage to the house of that giant of science fiction. With his most famous novel, War of the Worlds, Wells invented a key sci-fi story, the alien invasion. It was the original Monsters from Mars story and remains the best. A wake-up call to a smug British Empire that still considered itself to be the hardest army in the universe. But they were to be crushed into the ground by the march of the tripods.
If you go back and look at the 1890s, that was the height of British imperial power. Even all the stories about devastation and destruction are kind of remarkably strident and forthcoming, and very much like current crap American science fiction.
Certainly one strand of science fiction, right back to, you know, War of the Worlds. It's we're all living happily on Earth and we've got everything sorted out, but no. These Martians can come down and twat us all.
War of the Worlds has been remade by Hollywood many times, most recently as Independence Day. In the 30s, a radio version by Orson Welles was so realistic that it sent thousands of Yanks fleeing to the hills. Then in the 50s, George Pal produced this Technicolor version. Pal's film turned Welles' anti-British Empire tale into a piece of patriotic American propaganda.
Boy, that's big. Where's the comet?
It wasn't until the 50s when suddenly the American public were aware of the atomic bomb threat and the flying saucer scares, which started in the late 40s, that films like War of the Worlds had more of an impact.
The bomb. Its shadow fell across Pal's War of the Worlds, a time of paranoia, flying saucer scares, and commies everywhere.
Hello there, what do you see?
And America was so scared of the communists, the film actually did work almost like a communist allegory.
Another change to Welles' story was the aliens. In the book, the aliens move around using giant tripods, graceful three-legged engines of destruction that sweep across the English countryside at the speed of a flying bird. Their weapons were a mix of laser cannon, nerve gas, and a tentacle which would snake out, grab a man, and smash his head against a tree.
The filmmakers, of course, when they made the 1950s film version, after many tests realized that trying to make a tripod work on screen just didn't work. So they decided instead to capitalize on the flying saucer scare, which had completely dominated America, certainly the media, and redesign the Martian ships to look like flying manta rays with these wonderful sort of probing cobra necks which spit out the heat ray.
Hey there! Open up! Come on out! We're friends! That's right! We welcome you! We're friends! Yeah!
But this is what the Martians really looked like. And this is where Welles set War of the Worlds. Not in the Hollywood Hills, but in Woking.
So what does having this giant Martian in the middle of Woking represent for the town today?
It symbolises, paradoxically, a modern, forward-looking approach. The fact that the Martians came and destroyed Woking, in a sense, Woking has arisen again and keeps on redeveloping itself to meet the challenges of the future.
What does that mean for Woking?
Well, we like to make the claim that it makes Woking the birthplace of British science fiction. It does bring people to Woking, there's no doubt about it. You see people who come down especially to see The Martian and to explore the sites mentioned in the book, look at Welles House, have a walk around Horsell Common where the Martians actually landed, of course.
This is where the aliens first landed, Horsell Common. I like to think of it as the ground zero of British science fiction. Ian Wakefield, a local expert, does H.G. Wells' walking tours of Woking, and he took me to where the Martians first emerged to massacre the locals.
So this is basically the first recorded use of a laser gun in science fiction. It's kind of here. But before it's kind of set upon the crowd, They're reacting, I think Wells describes them reacting a little bit like dodos. Because it was a bit of a party, really, wasn't it? People gathered around the capsule.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an unusual thing to find in the Surrey countryside, and people were making the most of it. It was a lovely, hot, sunny day, and people were using it as an excuse to go out and enjoy themselves.
I've got the headline written here, actually. Do you know what it is?
I can probably remember it. It's Message from Mars. Is it something like that?
Message received from Mars. Remarkable story from Woking.
Yes.
Now, as a historian of Woking, if the words remarkable story from Woking ever been used before, since, or after?
Oh, I should think they've been used before, yeah. They've certainly been used since. I mean, we've had a few remarkable stories with murders and things like that happening in the area, but nothing like Martians.
Of course, from here, the Martians head out. They go over Woking, and then they work their way up through Surrey, past Wimbledon and Kingston, devastating them both in an act of murderous good taste, before eventually they reach London. And it is, of course, in London that the Martians meet their nemesis, germs.
In the end, it wasn't guns or missiles that stopped the Martians. It was the common cold. This minute virus succeeded where man and God had failed. Wells was a fully paid-up atheist, and he enjoyed undermining religion at every turn in the novel. Another broadside against Christianity comes in the form of a snivelling priest.
The priest character in his book, because there is a curate that appears in his book, is very much an anti-hero. When he's trapped in the house, which is near one of the landing sites of the Martian cylinders, he turns out to be somebody who jeopardizes the life of others, somebody who believes that there's doom and gloom, a prophet of doom, in fact, and somebody who is willing to sacrifice himself and others to the Martians because he becomes insane at the thought of religion being unable to cope with this Martian invasion.
The priest just can't believe that God would allow Weybridge to be destroyed. But once again, the Americans had to change it. They couldn't stomach this dismissive take on religion.
In the film version, we have a very different approach. We have a priest actually approaching the Martian machines in the hope to make peace with them.
Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth.
The priest goes to negotiate with the Martians.
And I will dwell in the house of the Lord.
He is dignified, noble, Christian, and toast. But in the film, the Yanks pray to God to save them, and like a good boy, he does.
O Lord, we pray thee, grant us the miracle of thy divine intervention.
The movie ends on a high note with religion, of course, saving the day. The film becomes very religious at the ending, something that would have had Wells spinning in his grave. People are seeking comfort in churches. The religious bodies are shown to be the only people who seem to have some faith that there's going to be some timely intervention by God, which of course there is in the movie.
After all that men could do had failed, the Martians were destroyed and humanity was saved by the littlest things which God in his wisdom had put upon this earth.
So it all turns out quite nicely. But Wells wasn't finished. Next up, how he time travels thousands of years into the future and discovers that humanity is doomed.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you?
H.G. Wells came up with all the great science fiction ideas.
Giant gastropods.
His books warned us that mankind was going to hell in a handcart. Unless we changed our ways, we'd end up like this. Blue, in a blonde wig.
H.G. Wells was a socialist, and he was very involved with the scientific thinking of the day. One of his teachers, Thomas Huxley, was in fact the grandfather of Aldous Huxley. He also was heavily influenced by Darwin.
Darwin's theory of evolution, that man is descended from apes and is progressively improving over time, was subverted by Wells in War of the Worlds. The Martians are proof of how evolution could go horribly wrong.
It's not the Germans who are coming to get us. It's the Martians who are the great other. They're also ourselves in the future. They're also humanity devolved to a brain and an appetite.
H.G. Wells came up with our other science fiction standard of time travel. In his first novel, The Time Machine, the traveller gets into a rickety Victorian contraption and it sends him flying off into a nightmarish future.
Right at the end of the novel, we see him transported into Earth's primordial sludge. In fact, Earth has returned through the processes of evolution to the way in which it began and soon will be stardust. The most intelligent species on Earth at the end of the Time Machine is a great giant crab.
Wells was an idealist and a socialist. He was sneered at for believing in such crazy things as feminism. Here, he's caricatured creating the woman of the future, ugly, looks like a bloke, and has a baby with a big Martian head. But Wells had his own ideas about the future, and to take us there, he invented the time machine.
There's some brilliant stuff as well. He's an amazing imagination about the process of time travel makes the time traveller sick. And it's so wonderfully described when he pushes forward on the lever and things start really going like Kubrick. But it's not a pleasant thing at all, you know, and he finds himself sort of nauseous in the future.
The 60s Hollywood version was a rollicking action-adventure movie. Rod Taylor played the time traveller, an early version of Doctor Who.
The Time Machine, that was a perennial favourite that always used to be on, and there's the very pleasing bit where he goes back in time in his time machine and he's watching the shop front and all the fashions change. I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
I began to grow very fond of that mannequin. Maybe because, like me, she didn't age.
I love the film. I think it's one of the most charming things. It's not, it kind of bowdlerizes the sentiments of the book a bit, but it's a lovely thing. I wish I could have that machine. To this day, that's a design classic if ever there was one. It has a little upholstered chair and a little date thing, coloured lights, and a kind of crystal rod, which Rod Taylor goes forward on. But the best thing is this fantastic wheel on the back, this disc. It just says time machine, something clever about it that makes you think it's somehow feasible.
When the traveller arrives in the future, he finds that humanity's taken a strange turn. Half of us live above ground and we call it Eloi, and we kind of flounce around and don't really do very much. And the other half of humanity live underground, and they're hideously deformed troglodytes called Morlocks, who are cannibals basically, and they feast on human flesh. And they squint and never see the sun.
So no change there then.
But the book is full of socialist ideas of the future, and the underclass, the Morlocks, and the Eloi, who are the upper class, get to their natural extensions, and the working classes eat the indolent aristocracy, which seems fine by me, actually.
So this was the destiny of the Eloi. They were being bred by the Morlocks, who had degenerated into the lowest form of human life, cannibalism.
When the Time Machine was written in the 1890s, the upper and working classes lived in different worlds. Wells saw them ending up as different species, with the proles chowing down on eaten schoolboys, served with a rich sauce of pureed brigadier on a confit of Sloanes.
The Eloi, the people who live above ground, seem to symbolize the results of a middle-class evolution. In Victorian times, the middle classes were increasingly cushioned, both intellectually and also physically. Their world was made ever more convenient, ever more detached from hard labor. The Eloi, as a result of that, seem almost mushed. They don't value the learning that's brought them to this point. The time traveller's most disappointed to see that books mean nothing. Scientific knowledge has eventually defeated itself. It's no longer read, it's no longer produced.
What have you done? Thousands of years of building and rebuilding, creating and recreating so you can let it crumble to dust.
equally, the other half of that, the much more sinister half, is that the working classes have descended underground and they're cannibals. They prey upon the Eloi in order to survive, to stay alive. They're beasts. They can't be reasoned with. They can only be frightened with fire. In some ways, it's despairing, even as it recognizes the value of scientific advance and, in a way, the indomitable power of evolution.
H.G. Wells loved dumping on optimistic views about progress and the empire. He was a good old-fashioned British pessimist who doubted anything would ever turn out right. Even science itself couldn't save us, and if it fell into the hands of a mad scientist, it could kill us all.
Don't you see what it means? Power. Power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
Jack, listen to me. Listen.
Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the Holy of Holies. Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me.
In The Invisible Man, H.G. Wells comes up with another great science fiction idea: invisibility. Now, most of us have wondered what we'd do if we could become invisible. What the Invisible Man desires is to take over the world. Unfortunately, he forgot that it's awfully hard to take over the world when you've got your kit off.
Are you satisfied now, you fools? It's easy, really, if you're clever. A few chemicals mixed together, that's all, and flesh and blood and bone just fade away. A little of this injected under the skin of the arm every day for a month. An invisible man can rule the world. Nobody will see him come, nobody will see him go. He can hear every secret. He can rob, wreck, and kill. Not if he can't get no further than this room, he won't. You shut the door.
Wells combined warnings about the future with a joy in destroying everything he saw as repressive and dull. He came from the suburbs, and in his stories he went back home and wreaked his revenge on their complacency. British science fiction is always full of such warnings, terrible prophecies about the future, which we ignore at our peril. As Wells said in his epitaph, "I told you so, you damned fools." Next week, a mad scientist invents the greatest monster of them all, Frankenstein's monster, the bastard offspring of a single mother and a raging queen from Birmingham.